Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're taking a really deep dive into a fascinating, but honestly, deeply turbulent period in human history, pre-Islamic Arabian society, which is widely known as the Age of Ignorance, or Jahiliyyah. This was a time and place characterized by extreme societal decay. Actually, scratch that. Decay doesn't even cut it. It was an absolute moral collapse, marked by spiritual loss and some incredibly brutal customs. But to truly understand the profound impact of the divine guidance that followed, we really have to look closely at the darkness that preceded it. So we're going to examine the religious, social, and moral landscape of this era, pulling directly from historical sources, Quranic verses, and authentic hadith.
Here is how we'll map out our journey today. We'll start with the historical context, move into the fall into idolatry, discuss the plight of women, look at tribal warfare, explore the economic and moral decay, and finally arrive at the dawn of guidance. Let's get right to it. Section 1, Historical Context, the Eve of Transformation. Now, to really wrap our heads around the massive scale of the change that eventually occurred, we first need to set the stage and look at this historical timeline. Roughly around 570 CE, we have what's famously known as the Year of the Elephant. According to historical sources, Abraha, who was the ruler of Abyssinia, literally marched on Mecca with an army of elephants. His goal? To completely destroy the Kaaba. But his army was miraculously destroyed by flocks of birds, a monumental event that preserved this sacred sanctuary. Fast forward just a bit, and in the roughly 40 years prior to prophethood, this era of Jahiliyyah reached its absolute peak. Idolatry, moral decay, tribal bigotry, it was rampant, spread like wildfire. Yet, right in the midst of this timeline, in 571 CE, on the 12th of Rabi al-Awwal, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born, and that completely set the stage for a monumental shift in human history.
Section 2, the fall into idolatry, forgetting the monotheism of Abraham. So, a major defining characteristic of this peak Jahiliyyah was the complete, utter spiritual loss in the region. The people of the Arabian Peninsula had originally been taught the pure monotheism of Prophet Abraham, but over generations, they completely abandoned it for widespread polytheism and idol worship. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the staggering number, 360. That is the number of literal physical idols that were placed in and around the sacred Kaaba. Imagine that. That's almost one for every single day of the year. The very house built by Abraham solely for the worship of one God had been filled to the brim with these objects crafted from stone and wood. And the Quran actually addresses this direct contradiction and logical fallacy so beautifully. Surah An-Nahl points out the ultimate irony of idol worship. It highlights that these objects of worship are entirely powerless. They can't create a single thing because they themselves are just creations, sculpted by human hands. It was a profound challenge to the society to wake up and actually use their reason. And the historical resolution to all this idolatry is just profoundly powerful. According to authentic narrations in Sahih Bukhari and the biography by Ibn Hisham, upon the conquest of Mecca, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, walked through the Kaaba and struck down these 360 idols using just the tip of his bow. And as they fell, he recited a verse from Surah Al-Isra, "Truth has come and falsehood has departed. Indeed, falsehood is bound to depart." Just like that, the original monotheism of Abraham was finally restored. Section 3, the plight of women, a society lacking mercy. The darkness of this era, well, it went far beyond just religious practices. It infected the very way human beings treated one another. We really have to brace ourselves as we look at this next section because it reveals a society that was utterly lacking in basic human mercy. The absolute vulnerability of women and girls during the Age of Ignorance is, without a doubt, one of the most tragic realities of human history. Women were entirely stripped of any inheritance rights. They were treated far more like property than actual people. And worse, the birth of a daughter wasn't something to be celebrated. It was viewed as a profound, agonizing mark of social shame. This incredibly twisted cultural mindset led to the most horrific practice imaginable. Infant daughters were frequently buried alive in the dust by their own fathers, just to supposedly save face in society. Absolutely devastating. The Quran directly and severely condemned this horrific cruelty. These verses from Surah An-Nahl captured the sheer psychological darkness of these men perfectly. And when one of them is given the good news of a female child, his face becomes dark, and he suppresses his grief.
He hides himself from the people because of the ill of which he has been informed. Should he keep it in humiliation or bury it in the dust? Unquestionably, evil is what they decide. This divine text laid bare the barbaric nature of their actions, and thankfully, it brought a swift end to female infanticide. Section 4. Tribal warfare, bloodshed and blind loyalty. Now, alongside all this social cruelty was a deeply fractured, highly chaotic political landscape. Arabian society was constantly ripped apart by endless, bloody tribal warfare. We're talking about generations fighting brutal wars that lasted for decades, often sparked by the most trivial, petty disputes you could imagine. And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast between the mindset of the time and the justice that Islam introduced. Historians note that society was bound by blind tribal bigotry. Their literal governing rule was help your brother, whether he is the oppressor or the oppressed. It was tribal loyalty entirely devoid of a moral compass. You fought for your blood, even if your blood was 100% in the wrong. But look at the right side. The Quranic standard totally shattered this. It declared that true honor is completely detached from bloodlines and lineage. It is based purely on piety and righteous action. This verse from Surah Al-Hujurat just beautifully dismantled the ethnic and tribal arrogance of the Jahiliyyah era. It established a universal human brotherhood, stating, "O mankind, we made you into nations and tribes that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous." It shifted the entire metric of human worth. Suddenly, it wasn't about who your ancestors were anymore. It was about how good of a person you strive to be. Let's move to the next section and see how this very same dynamic carried over into their economic systems as well. Section 5. Economic and moral decay, exploitation and the collapse of values. Because this darkness, it seeped deeply into their economy and their personal morality too. The vulnerable weren't just physically oppressed, they were being financially crushed, and basic moral values were entirely upside down. Let's look at exactly how this functioned. First, there was rampant usury, or riba. According to Tafsir Ibn Kathir, when a debt was due and a poor person couldn't pay, the lender would simply demand, pay the debt now or increase the owed amount to extend the time. It was a vicious, predatory cycle designed to keep the poor in permanent chains. On top of that, alcoholism and gambling weren't just common, they were celebrated. They were actual points of social pride. And as historical narrations from Aisha emphasize, marital practices were incredibly chaotic and deeply degrading to women, completely lacking any structured, dignified system. To rescue society from this massive financial exploitation, Surah Al-Baqarah delivered a decisive blow to the entire system of usury. The verse simply, but oh so powerfully states, Allah has permitted trade and has forbidden interest. Boom. That instantly abolished the predatory financial practices of the elites and established an economic model based on fair trade and mutual benefit, rather than just ruthless exploitation. And to cure the moral decay, Surah Al-Ma'idah provided the ultimate social reform. It swept away the destructive vices by outright declaring intoxicants, gambling, and occult practices as defilement. It instructed the believers to completely avoid them if they wanted to achieve true success. It was a total, sweeping cleansing of the toxins that had become so completely normalized in their society. So, when we step back for a second and look at the totality of this picture, the 360 idols, the buried infant daughters, the endless tribal bloodshed, the predatory usury, and the absolute moral collapse, we are forced to ask a really heavy question. How could a society entirely engulfed in such suffocating darkness ever find its way back to the light? How on earth does a civilization heal from that level of decay? Section 6. Dawn of Guidance. The arrival of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So the crucial point is, the answer lies in the arrival of the ultimate solution to this profound era of darkness. Out of the deepest, absolute lowest point of Jahiliyyah, a beacon of mercy was introduced to the world, forever altering the course of human history. The birth of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in 571 CE, it wasn't merely a historical footnote. No way. It was the catalyst for a total spiritual and societal revolution. Over the course of his prophethood, the divine guidance he delivered systematically dismantled every single pillar of ignorance we just examined today. It replaced idolatry with pure monotheism, cruelty against women with profound rights and respect, tribal warfare with universal brotherhood, and economic exploitation with charity and justice. Which leaves us with one final, really vital thought to reflect upon as we wrap up this explainer. History isn't just about the past, it's a mirror for our present. When we look at our world today, at systemic economic exploitation, at tribalism, at racism, at the mistreatment of the vulnerable, are we recognizing the modern shadows of these ancient ignorances? And more importantly, are we ready to study and apply this same timeless, divine guidance to dispel the darkness in our own era? I highly encourage you to dive deeper into these historical sources because there's always so much more to learn. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep seeking the light.